While the idealists are doodling in the margins, climate denier fascists are writing the book that will end the world as we know it. The stickies are a big part of the channel, and also the notes that I take in books. I've been doing this, though, since like 2010, and that's not really an exaggeration. In the fall of 2010, specifically, I read this book, The Analects of Confucius, for a course that I was taking, an intro to college shenanigans. And it's one of the first books that I ever remember annotating. The stickies are even a different color because it was so many years ago. One of the things that you don't see is that sometimes to finish books, I have to make little checklists in the table of contents. I have to check and check and check and check. There's this perception, I think, that because I read so much on the channel, that it's just like extremely easy for me. The stickies are in fact a coping strategy because I get distracted literally all the time. Okay, ironically, I was trying to tell you about Confucius and I got distracted looking through copies of Kierkegaard and Gadamer and the Pre-Socratics. Oops, it fits the theme of the video. Let's just take a look at this sample from Parmenides. I don't remember much about Parmenides except that I contrasted him with Heraclitus, who was the guy that said he could never step in the same river twice. That like everything is change person, which now that I'm thinking about it sounds a whole lot like Octavia Butler. God is change. Everything you touch, you change. All that you change changes you. But we're getting distracted again. Just check out all these doodles. Doodle, 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 doodle. All that he said here is that which is there to be spoken and thought of must be. And I'm like, ooh, the ontological argument for the existence of God. Literally thousands of years later, Hans Georg Gadamer in Germany is talking about our preconceptions in the world. And I'm writing a whole like little paragraph essay in myself about quantum mechanics and change of basis and spinning, like spin vectors, and how we can impose seemingly whatever spin vector we want on a system. It's probabilistic, but we can impose the basis that we want. The problem with this is that there is a finite amount of time in the world. If I wanted, I would read every book forever. And often I was looking, that's why I got distracted earlier, because I was looking for one. Often in my undergraduate textbooks, I would reach a point where I had been reading like 4 pages an hour. I calculated it once. It was too slow. And so I would draw a big line, and under that line, I just had to be pragmatist. I had to be practical. I had to give up on wanting to make connections to everything because I had to balance just the ability to process with the time constraints that I had in front of me. Incidentally, there's a really cool chapter in the book, Algorithms to Live by Brian Christian and Tom Griffiths, about computational stopping problems. Computer scientists have to write these into their mathematical models. You don't know how much time you have to make a decision before you make the decision, and that makes life complicated. You can continue reading Amazon reviews forever, but eventually you have to make a decision because your floor is dirty and you need a new vacuum. And I'm realizing for the computer science nerds that stopping problems are a little different from what I'm trying to explain, but I can't find the specific citation in here. Somewhere in this book is an example of the example of hiring people. How many people do you interview before you finally choose to hire someone? You don't know what information is out there. You don't know what kinds of candidates are out there. But if you keep passing on candidates, you might pass on a candidate that you actually want because you're trying to get perfect information. You can't get perfect information in time constraints. Sometimes we have to make decisions with incomplete information. I didn't have time to sticky tab this book, otherwise I never would have finished it, and that's kind of the point of the video. Anyway, initially when I started shooting, I wanted to talk about the sticky tabs as a way to keep me on track. I would get lost in thought, and then I could go back to a part of a thing that I had annotated, and I would know, okay, well, at least I was here. I would know where I had stopped if I continually was annotating things. It was an ADHD coping strategy that I understand in hindsight because whatever, all these things. And this book, I've been talking about it, and it's cool. But as now that my head's in philosophy world, I think there's a broader, more important lesson. Throughout the history of philosophy, there have been examples of people who are idealists. They think that if only we think enough or reason enough, we will eventually find the correct, right truth. As someone who got a physics degree and grew up Catholic, I find that very compelling because that seems to be what physics does. The more time goes on, the deeper into the underlying fundamental realities of the world it seems that we understand. So extrapolate. Well, it seems like if we just keep spending more time, we will continually get closer and closer and closer to the truth. The problem is that if this is how you read, you will never finish the book. In fact, there's our entire classes of philosophers called pragmatists. My first exposure to the pragmatists was a man named William James. And part of what the pragmatists understand is that we have finite little brains and we can't get perfect information, and that has a lot of important implications. And in fact, if we want to return to my little quantum mechanics doodle that I only halfway explained with spin vectors, it might be the case that down at one of the deepest levels of nature, uncertainty and incompleteness are baked into the nature of reality itself. I'm making this grimace face at myself because a whole lot of people use quantum mechanics as a metaphor for stuff that it really shouldn't be used as a metaphor for, but I'm talking about literal Heisenberg uncertainty principle seems to be part of what's down. I'd spent a lot of time in grad school studying this. In fact, I can't explain this in this video all the way, but like literally the physics of the multiverse comes out of this. Some physicists just don't want to believe in uncertainty. And so they say, oh, well, it's certain in this universe and it's certain in another. The answer to the uncertainty in the universe is infinite number of universes exist, which to me is totally preposterous. That's not the point of the video. The human drive for deeper and deeper and realer truths is one of our defining features, and we should absolutely keep it around. But it also needs to be kept in the context of our finite cognition and our finite ability to understand things. If we continue to try to find the perfect information before we make decisions, we will become cheaty-tastically morally paralyzed, unable to make decisions, and refrigerators, air conditioners are going to fall on our heads. This is a Good Place reference. If you haven't seen The Good Place, Chidi is a character who's a philosopher who tries to be a moral idealist, and he never makes decisions in his life. And at some point in the show, he actually raps about Soren Kierkegaard, and he says, "My name is Kierkegaard, and my writing is impeccable. Check out my teleological suspension of the ethical." We don't have time to explain that, but the teleological suspension of the ethical is kind of Kierkegaard's way of addressing this problem of uncertainty. Sometimes you have to make decisions that don't fit within the confines of your particular system of understanding of the world because we have incomplete information. Okay, I've hit that point enough times. Now let's apply it to the real world. Liberals, right now, of which I am one, and specifically progressives, in which I am also one, have become enamored with a type of moral perfectionism that is at times cheaty-tastically paralyzing. There's been a video going around TikTok about, like, you can't really say anything on the internet anymore. It's just impossible to make a claim that is perfectly true. Lemons are sour. Well, what about a specific type of lemon? Or what about maybe the lemon was traumatized? It's impossible to actually nail down a perfectly true statement. And to be clear, just like it is good that we are looking for truth in a deeper and deeper way in physics, it is also good that, morally speaking, we are trying to include more and more people in society who have historically been marginalized. I agree with that. But that moral truth exists in a context of finite time. In our desire for moral perfectionism, progressives are not moving forward. We are paralyzing each other with rhetoric battles. Perfectionism has manifested in us internally tone policing each other, spending our energy twiddling our perfectionist thumbs while Rome burns. I pulled this book, The Education of an Idealist by Samantha Power, because she continually reflects on this theme throughout her career as a reporter and a UN ambassador and an advisor to the president. In the intellectual world, in the epistemic world, we sometimes have to make decisions with incomplete information. In fact, often have to do that. But in the moral and political world, the analog of this is that we often have to make morally imperfect decisions in order to make things better. Another word for that, in my head at least, is pragmatism. But even more realistically, is Biden too old? Yes. But the other guy is trying to do a fascist coup. It is not a betrayal of your ideals to temporarily compromise them in order to make them real in the world. Because while we are optimizing internally, everybody else is getting legislation passed. But Dr. King said that thing about incrementalism that one time, and actually read this other shit about time and leave me alone. This is going to be a total tone shift when this video loops. Put differently,